Toward the start of the story, we are informed that devils really used to live here on Earth with people, and in the midst of stress or risk, they would truly safeguard people by behaving like their watchmen. The story begins to unfurl, and the female lead, Do-hee, is presented. She is shown taking off from somebody in the extraordinary dimness of the night as fog encompasses her, scared of her follower. She unexpectedly stops to look forward and finds that somebody is moving toward her. She contemplates whether the individual before her is a threat to her life, or on the other hand, in the event that he will help her. Taking a gander at the circumstance, she understands that she has no other choice, however, to look for help from that coming outsider. Thus, Do-hee begins racing to him. Before the secret is uncovered, we are taken to a second from a long time back. This set of experiences happens at a stopgap church that is by all accounts worked inside a tent. Given Christians appeal to God while they are kneeling down, looking for insurance from the shrewd devils, directed by the minister. Unexpectedly, in only a couple of moments, a man dressed totally in dark garments enters the tent with his face covered by a hood. The second the supplicating Christians look at that man, they begin shouting that an evil spirit has shown up, and they all escape shouting for their lives. This evil spirit, named John Guwan, hops up on the platform toward the front and removes his hood to uncover his face. Guwan had come just to spread dread, and his presence was sufficient to achieve that. He is going to leave. Be that as it may, a young lady tosses across at him, touching his cheek and leaving a dreadful, draining cut. The cleric surges over to the young lady to get her out of there securely. However, she will not leave and doesn't move. Guwan gets the cross that the young lady tossed at him, and he hands up his face. Guwan tracks down it back to her, choosing to be lenient and not create problems where it isn't required. He leaves as quickly as he came while the cut on his cheek recuperates before he even gets out of the congregation, as though it were never there in any case. He then, at that point, snaps his fingers and is shipped to somewhere else in a question of a second. His conviction is that people have three unique adversaries, the first being their own bodies, the second being their own personal cravings, and the third being underhanded spirits. He in the long run arrives at the bank of the ocean while strolling. That is where he sees an unfortunate angler who is attempting to get fish, yet ends up being fruitless in the entirety of his endeavors. Guwan approaches the angler and starts a discussion with him. He shrewdly tosses a snare by inquiring as to whether he might want to end his craving. The man answers, saying okay. He wishes that he was not ravenous. However, nobody can help him since there are no fish nearby in the water. Guwan can't help contradicting his assertion by saying that the waters are brimming with fish trying to control him. He then wakes up his fingers, and fish begin hopping from the outer layer of the water, with the end goal that the unfortunate angler sees fish to the extent that he can see the water. The man is taken by wonder before his mind at last cycles what simply occurred. He moves in the direction of Guwan and tells him that I know precisely exact thing you are, and afterward continues to call Guwan a troll of some sort or another. Subsequent to hearing this, Guwan feels offended and raises his voice a tad. The man further keeps on speculating, offending Guwan with each erroneous supposition. The man quits any pretense of speculating, and afterward asks him what he is. Guwan answers that he is a devil of the hidden world, the equivalent being that people call insidious spirits. The man doesn't accept this and says that perhaps his craving has arrived at such a level that he has begun to envision the absurdest of things. The second he finishes this assertion of his, a gigantic fish hops straight out of the water and comes right towards him and grounds solidly in his arms. In the wake of encountering such a great presentation of force, he really accepts what Guwan told him and acknowledges that he is truly an evil spirit. The angler then, at that point, inquires as to whether he can truly satisfy any wish that he has. In light of which, Guwan unexpectedly produces an agreement in his grasp and peruses it out, which expresses that the angler's desires can't be satisfied free of charge, so they should make an arrangement. The man gets some information about this arrangement, to which he answers that the arrangement will keep going for a long time. For the following 10 years, the man won't ever be ravenous. However, when the 10 years are finished, his body will bite the dust and his spirit will be shipped off the hidden world. The man then asks him what the hidden world is. He answers that it is similar spot people call damnation. The man was eager to the point that he didn't contemplate the outcomes by any means. He essentially needed to dispose of this craving of his, so he acknowledged the arrangement. Guwan then, at that point, takes a needle and sticks it into his finger. Then, at that point, utilizes the man's blood-shrouded fingertip to stamp the agreement. This is precisely the way that Guwan exploits human franticness and utilization's insatiability to get people to fall into their own snares. The man winds up getting a great deal of fish, and he then expresses gratitude toward Guwan without a doubt. Guwan says that now he will meet the man following 10 years, realizing that the man will ask for his life by then at that point. Thus, Guwan leaves. We are taken back to right now, to the year 2023, present at the 2023 Korea President Grant capability, where our hero Dohee is available. A man moves toward her and begins to play with her while confusing her with a server at the occasion. In any case, at that exact second, the champ for the 2023 Korea President Grant is declared, and the victor is, as a matter of fact, Dohee. The one who moved toward her is left stunned and astounded. She then continues to stroll to the stage to accept her honor, and that is the point at which we figure out that she is the chief of Myri Gathering, one of the main food and drink organizations in Korea. The following day, Dohee runs over some as of late delivered news. The news was an article about her organization's recently sent off chilling juice, where there was off-base data about her item, which was composed off-base intentionally. Dohee asks her secretary Miss Shin to uncover the insights concerning this article. She then continues to make a beeline for her subsequent office. Yet Miss Shin stops her and says that she can't disregard things like these any longer, to which she answers that she lacks the opportunity to answer for these futile prearranged meetings. Miss Shin says that Lady Ju, who is now not blissful, won't get any more joyful. At that very time, Dohee gets a call from Lady Ju, whom she alludes to as all-powerful Ju. Dohee gets the call, and before Strong Chu gets the opportunity to say anything, Dohee inquires as to whether she completely finished her exam. Lady Ju then, at that point, tells her that Miss Shin is now let Dohee know where she needs to go today. She attempts to give a reason by saying that she has something vital to do. After this, Lady Ju answers by saying that she will likewise quit seeking her medicines done. That's what she says in the event that Dodo doesn't go on her date. Then at that point, she cares very little about seeking her medicines and tests done. Dohee answers by saying that she consents to go on the date, so Lady Ju ought to likewise seek her medicines and tests finished. Subsequent to hearing this, Lady Ju closes the call. Dohee then, at that point, goes to Miss Shin and asks her, how long will she need to bear the person on that date? Miss Shin answers that she just needs to bear that person for 30 minutes, so just for 30 minutes. Dohee then pivots and leaves for her date. From that point forward, the following scene starts, and as it starts, we can see Guwan strolling around in a room brimming with racks, and every rack contains a clock on it. The second a clock strikes 12, Guwan leaves to go get his prey, who for this situation ends up being the pioneer and manager of a mafia posse. This manager was loosening up inside a steaming hot sauna, while his watchmen and gangsters remained external the entryway of the sauna as his security. Right then, at that point, everything stops, and Guwan produces. He moves toward the pack chief while grasping the agreement. He shows the contact to the posse chief and lets him know that his 10-year time is finished. The posse chief then tosses a sundial right at Guwan and begins to take off. However, this was the entirety of no utilization. So he attempts to deal with Guwan, and he begins to demand additional time than what was guaranteed in the agreement. However, Guwan declines every one of his payoffs and offers and answers by making sense of that an arrangement was made, and regardless of what he is offered, he won't acknowledge it, and he will take his spirit with him to the hidden world. The mafia chief made the arrangement with John Guwan to satisfy his absurd covetousness for cash. However, presently the 10-year time span of that arrangement is finished. So the mafia chief starts to make a ton of offers, and even makes very ludicrous and egotistical offers. For example, when he says that the Guwan can take the spirits of every one of his thugs as a trade-off for letting him be. Guwan was not even prepared to move, so he declined each single proposition. At the point when the pack chief understands that the offers won't really work, he attempts to hit Guwan. However, he comes up short, and his own heart begins harming, and the aggravation is serious to such an extent that he tumbles down. While Guwan remains over the mafia chief, he says farewell to him and lets him know that he will pass on from a cardiovascular failure. At that exact instant, the man bites the dust. Guwan strolls over to the man, closes his eyes, and afterward continues to leave. The hooligans of the mafia chief run into the room just to track down their chief dead. So every one of them are left in complete stunningness. What's more, on this note, the scene closes. The following scene starts with Guwan being in his office. We are shown that the mafia chief's clock vanishes, so this implies that the clock addresses the time an individual has passed on to live subsequent to making an arrangement with Guwan. Then, Dohee is shown strolling inside an eatery, where a server moves toward her and tells her that a specific client has booked the whole spot. It is likewise unintentionally her birthday, so she believes that Madame Ju let the prearranged meeting know that it was her birthday. She then, at that point, lets the server know that she is really the visitor of the client who booked the whole cafe. The server then, at that point, directs her to the man, her prearranged meeting. The prearranged meetup is perusing a paper when she moves toward him. so his face is covered by the paper. Right as she plunks down, she tells the prearranged meeting that she is now hitched to her work, so she truly cares very little about folks. The prearranged meeting then brings down the paper that he was perusing, and he uncovers his face. It just so happens the prearranged meetup is really Guwan. Dohee is seeing his face. That is precisely when Guwan offers a savage expression by saying that he doesn't mind at all whether she weds her pad or she weds her business. He additionally messes around that assuming she circumvents telling everybody her own data, he might want to know the subtleties of her ledger. After she hears this, she begins snickering and inquires as to whether they at any point went to a similar school. He directly replies by saying no. She then, at that point, inquires as to whether they have at any point dated before previously, and he likewise answers with a no to this inquiry. So her look goes straight and boring. And that's what she says on the off chance that they have never dated or gone to class together. For what reason would he say he is not showing any habits? His answer was that no human has any regard before him. She flies off the handle after she hears this and gets up to leave. Yet similarly as she is doing that, she gets a text from Lady Jew, inquiring as to whether everything is working out positively on the date, and she likewise texts her that assuming something turns out badly, Dewey definitely understands how Lady Jew will treat herself. So she sits down once more and chooses to bear it only for another 30 additional minutes. Guwan had really reserved the whole eatery, so he and his prearranged meetup, who ended up being Dewey, could partake in a decent tranquil dinner without anybody close by to upset them. Notwithstanding, then again, Dewey really wound up finding what is going on very abnormal. Subsequent to seeing this little issue of clumsiness, Guwan contemplated what all that arrangement could be, and afterward he chose to answer what is happening by proposing to her that there were a lot of other sumptuous and high-evaluated cafes in the city close to them. Thus, Dohee answered strongly, proposing that assuming Guwan felt as such in any case, he ought to proceed to take his business to those close by places all things considered. Following this, she dismissed her face. Feeling chafed by Dohee's reaction, Guwan's contemplations dashed with dissatisfaction. These considerations were calling her things like irritating, disappointing, or disturbing, and, surprisingly, every one of the three of these, and that's just the beginning. In the meantime, as far as possible across town, Dewey's genuine expected prearranged meeting sat in a totally different eatery, perusing the sum of Dohee's profile. The profile uncovered a heartbreaking reality about her past through a post, which was that she was stranded early, snatched her business card from her handbag, and gave it over to him, asking him for his business card consequently. Nonetheless, Guwan wavered and immovably expressed that he doesn't give his own data to Finnish outsiders. Determined, Dohee then recommended that Guwan could likewise have been constrained into this equivalent circumstance. She then recommended that the two of them cooperate to track down an answer. Hesitantly, Guwan gave over his business card, uncovering himself as the proprietor of the Sunwall establishment. However, Dohee stayed ignorant about this reality. What's more, on this note, the scene closes. In this scene, Guwan dispatches into a talk about his establishment, getting it going by inquiring as to whether she had some awareness of his unbelievable groundwork. The paper, including his banner, fills in as proof, displaying his commitment. He then, at that point, continues to frame how his association really support customary expressions like singing, moving, acting, and conventional composition, determined to improve social impact, and introducing a renaissance for every single group of people yet to come. The account then moves to Guwan, communicating his bewilderment at her evident absence of mindfulness in regards to his establishment. Bothered by his censuring tone, Dohee interposes, spreading the word about it for him, that she knows all about custom while unpretentiously indicating her more current viewpoint. Guwan then, at that point, requests her what the genuine contribution from this all-powerful Jew is in this, and what her request is. These leaves Dohee sort of stunned. He then asks her what is really happening around there. She answers by telling him that now that he is asked, they ought to talk about the prearranged meeting. He's confounded and mumbles the word prearranged meeting out of his mouth, to which she answers by saying that the whole explanation the two of them were sent here was to attempt to frame a connection between the two of them. Subsequent to hearing this, he was left stunned. Similarly, as Dohee's clock of 30 minutes closes, a few thugs enter. The primary demonstration of devastation they do is to push an honest server out of their way. He loses his equilibrium, making the cake go flying up in the air. The cake was headed to fall on Dohee. John Guwan was very fast and prepared to act quickly. Yet he additionally figures out how to get the whole platter of cake. He additionally made all the difference as he immediately acted the hero without a second thought by any stretch of the imagination. She was very dazzled by him, so intrigued that she couldn't resist the opportunity to gaze at him. Her heart began to pulsate so quick as though it were in a race. Before she screws up and begins to play the fool, She blames the need to clean up so as to go or take off to the washroom. Gohan stayed still situated, since his eyes and looks were fixed on the cake that was just before him. He gradually and elegantly lowered himself to a chair. His developments were incredibly sensitive, exact, and centered. In the meantime, Dohi secured herself in the washroom and lacked the ability to quit recalling the second Gohan had saved her and her dress by moving her out of the way of the cake, which was on the way to fall on her. Her heart continued to pound with a blend of trust and vulnerability. She just couldn't resist the opportunity to contemplate whether Gohan had requested the cake for her birthday. This equivalent idea carried a weak blush to her cheeks, as she engaged herself with the possibility that maybe, quite possibly, he had an unexpected coming up for her. Her deference for Gohan shockingly began to develop with every particular second that cruised by. Indeed, even notwithstanding the underlying abhorrence she had for him. Be that as it may, right as Gohan arrived at his hand out to take the primary nibble of his cake, which he was anxious to attempt, the serene second he was anticipating was totally broken. An unexpected upheaval began, and it consumed the space as the Mafia manager's hooligan set to storm over to where Gohan was situated at his table. The thug began to request replies from Gohan with respect to his manager's unexpected vanishing. His voice was exceptionally low and obviously compromising in view of his tone and articulations. The pressure in the room unexpectedly turned out to be very tense, and Gohan's ideal and hotly anticipated snapshot of calm and harmony was suddenly hindered and upset. Nonetheless, his longing and hankering to simply devour his cake turned out to be areas of strength for so overwhelming that Gohan motioned for them to pause. His tone was incredibly firm, yet it was still extremely created. He made sense of as smoothly as he could that he had explicitly reserved a spot at this specific cafe a whole month prior to make sure he could appreciate and relish the experience to partake in this stunning cake. Gohan mentioned the hooligan permit him to relish this hotly anticipated second prior to starting to address some other issues. The hooligans didn't have the foggiest idea how to respond to this, so they didn't have any idea how to continue. So all they did was pass confounding looks and looks at one another, without having some other worries. Then the primary thug made an endeavor to jump on him. Gohan conveniently and keenly, in a capable way, steered the assault, diverting it with only a paper he tracked down close to him. Everybody was totally left in shock after he showed a little demonstration of dexterity. As the thugs glanced around at one another in amazement, the person who just endeavored to go after Gohan out of nowhere disappeared like a phantom, leaving the remainder of them confounded and bewildered. After recognizing a similar thug who evaporated, shooting Gohan's paper, the trepidation they felt incredibly strengthened, and afterward the hooligans started to request Gohan educate them concerning his personality and about his accessory. As a reaction, Gohan collapsed the paper he had in his grasp and started striking every one of them on their heads, making every one of them vanish individually. This activity made the head of the thugs shake with dread. Eventually, Gohan figured out how to catch and trap every one of them inside the bounds of that paper. At that definite second, Dohi got back from the washroom just to observe that the cake was absent. She ended up being incredibly confounded. So to dispose of this disarray, she asked Gohan where the cake went, and she likewise reminded him it was for her birthday. Gohan, in an exceptionally upset and terrible state of mind, began to affront her, saying that the cake was not so much for her. And after the put-downs, he began scrutinizing her, inquiring as to why he ought to try and mind assuming it was her birthday. Dohi felt incredibly offended, and she was likewise exceptionally wounded by his way of behaving and his words, so she left. As the gathering traveled back, Gohan's temperament soured from the new, uproarious contention. He got some information about the article's writer. Miss Shin uncovered that it was Swan, Madame Jew's girl, and furthermore the leader of their auxiliary, Mirai clothing organization. Dohi was thought about why they couldn't leave her alone. Their return was corrupted with pressure, mirroring the unsettled clash. Gohan's dissatisfaction waited, a quiet tempest among them. The disclosure added weight to their excursion, meshing a string of disquiet into the generally tranquil outing. Their journey for serenity was eclipsed by the waiting disunity. She out of nowhere sees a news report about the continuous epic showdown inside her gathering. This shows that the fight for the organization's chairmanship has started among its own proprietors. This triggers a flashback about her gathering, which was established by Madame Jew. Madame Jew has two youngsters. Her senior child, Sayak Min, whom she doesn't consider equipped for dealing with the gathering, and her second little girl, Swan, whose spouse dwells abroad in light of the fact that Swan has consistently longed for living in Paris since her life as a youngster. Swan has twins, Austin and Justin, while Sayak Min has a child. Madame Jew's sibling likewise has a child, Sayakun, who is likewise a competitor in this fight for control as he regulates Madame Ju's other organization. At last, the one individual Madame Ju believes over all others is Doohee, whom she embraced a long time back. From that point forward, Doohee has been central to Madame Ju, who has shared all her work with her. This has caused Madame Ju's kids to hold on a hatred towards Doohee. However, they dare not express it in her presence. Doohee is extremely mindful that she resembles an infection to them, a presence they wish to kill. Be that as it may, Madame Ju is dependent on Doohee for everything. Getting back to the present, Doohee gets a call from a new number distinguished as Taejun, the previous top of her gathering's monetary group. Taejun illuminates Doohee that he has data that could hoist her to the place of executive inside her gathering. Nonetheless, he demands talking about this matter face-to-face as opposed to via telephone, training Doohee to reach him later, assuming she wishes to find out more. Before Doohee can ask further, Taejun unexpectedly closes the call. Uninterested in the battle for control, Doohee trusts in mission, commenting on how currently even these people are endeavoring to include her in their political maneuvers. Doohee gets a message from her grandma inferring that she may color. Concerned, Doohee hurries to her grandma's side, just to think that she is calmly resting, fit as a fiddle. Madame Ju calls Doohee, who is as yet faltering from the previous disarray. Notwithstanding her underlying resentment, Doohee tunes in as Madame Ju muses about mortality and the significance of good deeds. Madame Ju's words inspire an emotional response from Doohee, who is helped to remember the passing idea of life. At last, Madame Ju indicates an unexpected treat for Doohee, leaving her fascinated at this point careful. Regardless of his antipathy for praising birthday celebrations, Doohee's grandma demands denoting the event. With an end goal to mollify her, Doohee partakes in the festival, cutting the cake she offers. As they think back about the past, his grandma affectionately reviews their common recollections, comparing their excursion to a blood and gore film. She affectionately encourages him to pay attention to her, bringing up his insubordinate streak that traces all the way back to his young life, when he would frequently take off from home to set off for college. She makes reference to an occurrence when he got her in a long vehicle on her most memorable day of school, making sense of that he needed to safeguard her from being dealt with like a vagrant kid by her friends. In a perky trade, Doohee's grandma questions why he mediated in her school relationship by taking care of her beau. He makes sense of that he did so in light of the fact that the sweetheart's significant other disliked him, and he accepted the beau was not reasonable for her. She questions the thinking behind reaching the man, to which he answers with an example on not passing judgment on in light of superficial factors, underscoring the kid's internal goodness in spite of any visible presentation. Notwithstanding, she counters, expressing that his appearance was the main positive perspective, featuring his inconsiderate and awkward way of behaving. Inquisitive about his looks, she takes out his photograph and secures about his appearance face-to-face. She then, at that point, uncovers his character, recognizing him as Guwan. However, the man discourteously declines the prearranged meeting plan, frustrating Doohee and her grandma. They spot Guwan in the hall of his foundation, where fellow Young the young lady is rehearsing a conventional dance, sitting close to him as his associate Park, similar man from quite a while back. Guwan had initially marked a 10-year contract with him, which has since been expanded various times, making sense of Park's proceeded with presence. A call from Doohee helps Guwan to remember his disregarded cake, provoking him to leave hurriedly. Park sees his bothered state and asks about the explanation. Guwan makes sense of that he passed up eating his number one cake because of his bustling timetable. Park tests further, inquiring as to why he was so engrossed. Guwan uncovers that he was on a prearranged meeting, and during fellow Yang's dance execution, she startlingly shouted, scrutinizing his date's character and contrasting her magnificence with hers. Stunned by fellow Yang's eruption and considering how she heard from such a distance, Guwan is intruded on by Park, who leads him away. In the meantime, Taejun illuminates the pair about a looming danger. This episode uncovers that Park and Youthful have been with Guwan all through their previous existences. Moreover, it becomes clear that Person Yang has eyes for Guwan, in spite of the fact that he is generally aggravated by both her and Park. Guwan owns up to keeping them alive superfluously, inferring a more profound association. Steward Park recognizes Guwan's hesitance to be distant from everyone else, proposing that he has kept them around for friendship. Be that as it may, Guwan, showing a touch of egotism, declares his interminability and questions the requirement for friendship. He excuses this comprehension other might interpret eternality, guaranteeing that it offers an alternate sort of satisfaction. He then trains them to zero in on their errands. Park shows up at the ocean side, a spot she regularly visited with her folks, setting off a rush of recollections enjoyed with them. As sun sets, Guwan looks at the clock tower, which shows up strangely important to him that day. In the interim, Park and fellow Yang sit on the ocean front until late, the finish of fellow Yang's reviled birthday. A taxi shows up, however the driver's disposition raises doubts. Fellow Yang questions his character, just to find that he is a similar executioner who killed Tae-jun. The driver endeavors to deliver her oblivious with chloroform, uncovering that her passing is connected to Lady Ju. Fellow Yang, nonetheless, fakes obviousness and figures out how to get away from the vehicle, starting an emotional pursuit scene. In the interim, Guwan from the clock tower sees the unfurling occasions. He motions towards fellow Yang, demonstrating his attention to her circumstance. Fellow Yang, frightened by his surprising appearance, puzzles over whether he is there to save her or damage her, starting a blend of dread and trust to her. Dewey's doubts developed in regards to the expected coordinated effort between the executioner and Guwan. At the point when she looked for Guwan's help, he demanded working out an agreement first. Notwithstanding her criticalness, Guwan stayed firm. Unbeknownst to her, he disguised a blade in his grasp all through their cooperation. With a need to get going, she hesitantly consented to his terms. Guwan's attitude moved unexpectedly, strengthening her anxiety. He said something about his typical strategy of not helping without a marked agreement, however communicated an unusual motivation after seeing the man before them. Jumping all over the opportunity, he took an undermining action toward her. Detecting risk, she made a scramble towards her vehicle, intending to get away. In any case, her arrangements were thwarted when Guwan powerfully tossed the executioner onto the hood of her vehicle, leaving her in a condition of shock. As Guwan progressed towards her, his eyes loaded up with wrath. She was overpowered with dread. Acting quickly, she escaped from the vehicle, looking for asylum across the scaffold. Guwan moved toward her, broadening his hand. The image of the blessed cross in his palm started to shine as he talked, helping her to remember their arrangement. Secured in one another's look, they were out of nowhere hindered by the executioner's coming vehicle. Alarm expressed as she watched the vehicle speed towards them. Guwan endeavored to intercede, however without much of any result. As dread held her, she automatically delivered his hand and started to fall. Decisively, Guwan jumped after her. However, as they dove into the water, he passed out, though he wound up sinking, then at that point mysteriously rising. Seeing Guwan's predicament, she burrowed to save him, however attempted to carry him to the surface. Wonderfully, as she got a handle on his hand, she figured out how to lift him, and the blessed cross in his control moved to hers. Then wrecked, she too blacked out. At the point when Do-hee recovered cognizance, she ended up lying on the shore. Adjacent to her stood Guwan, who held her hand. As she turned out to be completely mindful of her environmental factors, Guwan couldn't resist the opportunity to see that the heavenly cross blemish on his hand had disappeared, the very mark that contained his powers. Do-hee, gathering her considerations, moved toward Guwan and offered her thanks. Express gratitude toward God, we both made do. Nonetheless, Guwan actually felt woozy. At the point when Do-hee intuitively contacted her own head, Guwan's consideration was attracted to the blessed cross imprint now apparent on her hand. Following up without really thinking, he went after it. This surprising exchange of the sacred cross left them both baffled, as waves ran into the stones, taking steps to immerse them. The heavenly cross in Do-hee's grasp started to produce a brilliant gleam, stopping the water in its tracks. Seeing this wonderful occasion, both Do-hee and Guwan were left paralyzed. Guwan specifically was surprised by the unexpected return of his powers, taking into account they had bombed him only minutes prior. She addressed him, shocked by the circumstance and his personality. Guwan accordingly questioned her activities. Their shared bewilderment balanced weighty in air as they traded dazed looks before Do-hee capitulated to obviousness. Guwan acted quickly, forestalling her breakdown and setting off a flashback of their dive into the water where the heavenly cross moved from his hand to hers. Notwithstanding this, Do-hee stayed oblivious until Guwan at last stirred her and pulled her to somewhere safe and secure. Later in the clinic, Do-hee recovered awareness, tormented by the memory of her waterlogged plunge, grasped by uneasiness. She softly kneading her head surprised her, developing her feeling of incredulity. With clear love, Guwan consoled her, communicating alleviation at her enlivening. Question actually waiting, Do-hee scrutinized the truth of her circumstance, feeling like she could in any case be caught inside her fantasies. Guwan's unfaltering presence and Miss Shin's clarification about her condition grounded her immediately, yet the sterile medical clinic environmental factors just filled her nervousness further. It appeared she had been oblivious for 5.5 hours. as Miss Shin illuminated her. Guwan quickly asked about her prosperity, noticing her developments for indications of trouble. Miss Shin, seeing her unconventional way of behaving, at last addressed why she was acting so unusually. Nonetheless, Guwan was engrossed. He was distracted with really focusing on her, encouraging her to heed the specialist's guidance and rest for some time. Shocked by his anxiety, she gazed at him in shock. Detecting the pressure, Miss Shin pardoned herself to call the specialist and left the room. As she left, he went to the individual who had saved her, doubting their activities. Guwan defeat with dissatisfaction, tossed his cloth to the ground and requested to realize what was occurring. Astounded by his abrupt tenderness, she considered how he had become so well-mannered, particularly towards her. Guwan's reaction helped her to remember her past solicitation to be treated with deference the following time they met. She laughed, contemplating the ramifications of their connections now that Miss Shin could expect they were dating. She asked about the whereabouts of the one who had gone after them. Guwan guaranteed her that he had given all the important data to the police and that the culprit would before long be caught. Concern obvious in his look, Guwan then, at that point, got some information about her prosperity, explicitly noticing her wrist. He owned up to feeling a few aggravation in her body and responded to worry, getting some information about his condition. Guwan admitted that he wasn't excelling by any stretch of the imagination and had been enthusiastically looking for her recuperation. As he motioned towards her hand, she saw the tattoo on his own hand interestingly, provoking her interest in its starting point. Before she could endeavor to eliminate it, Guwan blocked her hand, keeping her from doing as such. Regardless of his dissent, she continued, attempting to delete the tattoos individually. In any event, turning to sprinkling water on them. Guwan encouraged her to quit, expecting that she would demolish it with her endeavors. Unexpectedly, Dohee's memory overflowed back, reviewing the occasions of the earlier evening. Falling into the water, her frantic battle to arrive at the shore, and the strange sight of water, suspended in the air. Stunned by her memory, she pondered. Perhaps I drank an excessive amount of last evening. Going to Guwan, she barraged him with inquiries regarding their whereabouts, their exercises, and the beginning of the enormous tattoo decorating her hand. Not entirely set in stone to free herself of the new imprint, she endeavored to move past him. Yet Guwan persevered. Disregarding his fights, he took steps to drive her direction through. Yet entirely Guwan stayed resolute. As she attempted to pull her hand away, he fixed his hold, demanding she cease from eliminating the tattoo. Their trade raised, with He attesting her responsibility for hand, and Guwan asserting responsibility for tattoo confounded by its presence on her skin. Baffled by Guwan's refusal to deliver her, He gave a last admonition, building up to 3 preceding endeavoring to slap him. Nonetheless, Guwan's secretive power mediated, immobilizing her other hand and keeping her from striking him. Astonished by her failure to move, He battled against the imperceptible power, her endeavors purposeless. Noticing the blessed cross gleaming in He's hand, Guwan delivered his grasp, making his power disseminate. Alarmed by the abrupt delivery, Shin showed up with the specialist, who directed an exhaustive exam on He, consoling her that she was totally fine and just required a rest to recuperate completely. With those words, the specialist and Miss Shin left, letting He and Guwan be. Regardless of He's demand that he leave, Guwan stayed close by. Not long after their takeoff, cops showed up to ask about the occurrence, guiding their inquiries to Guwan. After seeing him there, they expected a really examining tone, getting some information about the idea of their relationship. We discovered that you both met out on the town, and it was your most memorable gathering. So would you say you were intending to get hitched? They asked, looking for clearness on the circumstance. Both he and Guwan passionately dismissed the idea of marriage, with he stating her indifference for such matters, and Guwan communicating his longing to endlessly stay single. Miss Shin confirmed to the cops quite that they had just met out on the town. Be that as it may, as their contention followed, an alarm message hindered them, blazing on Guwan's telephone. It showed that an agreement had lapsed, requiring his flight to gather the spirit of the assigned person as installment, encouraging he to deal with herself, particularly her hand. Guwan speedily pardoned himself and left for his office. After arriving at his office, Guwan found Steward Park situated in his seat, engaged in perusing Guwan's book. As Guwan entered, Park hurriedly endeavored to hide the book, yet Guwan had previously gotten a quick look at it. Mentioning its return, Guwan looked as Park made a quick break, gripping the book firmly. I reserve the option to peruse it as well, Park demanded as he ran, flipping through the pages as he escaped. Interested by what he had perused, Park shared a frightening disclosure from the book. On the off chance that Guwan neglected to finish everything with new arrangement, or neglected to gather a spirit on time. Stunned by this disclosure, Park could scarcely accept what he had quite recently learned. Be that as it may, Guwan quickly held onto the book from him, reprimanding him for diving into its items without authorization. Park, endeavoring to legitimize his activities, helped Guwan to remember their cozy relationship, comparing it to that of family. Inquisitive about the book's importance, Park squeezed Guwan for more data, yet Guwan stayed resolute, underlining the significance of avoiding the items in the book at all costs. As Park asked further, Guwan essentially emphasized the book's importance, cautioning Park to avoid it. Guwan safely stashed the book in his storage. What's more, Park, noticeably concerned, looked for affirmation about the desperate outcomes referenced inside its pages. Guwan confirmed the reality of the section, yet offered no further subtleties, conceding his own absence of full comprehension of the matter. Giving Park due his card, Guwan taught him to direct a careful examination concerning her experience, including her family ancestry, past connections, scholarly history, and individual inclinations. Puzzled by Guwan's unexpected interest in this lady, Park scrutinized the degree of his interest. Accordingly, Guwan gave him a disturbed glare, inciting Park to joke about her possibly winning his love, referring to their new experience. Guwan's, as of now, distraught soul was additionally disturbed by Park's prodding, and he naturally endeavored to apply his control over him, just to understand his frailty. Hastily withdrawing his hand, he attempted to cover his disappointment. Notwithstanding, Park, seeing the shortfall of the blessed cross mark on Guwan's hand, asked about its vanishing. Guwan, surprised, offered weak reasons, and endeavored to redirect Park's consideration. In any case, Park's sharp perception continued. "Where is your tattoo gone? And for what reason do you look so abnormal today?" Park squeezed, detecting something not right. Guwan kept on demanding that all was well. Guwan composed a feeble reason, asserting he had briefly loaned them to another person. However suspicious, Park appeared to acknowledge this clarification. Showing Dewey's card, Park hypothesized whether she had some way or another taken Guwan's powers. Guwan, confounded by the unexpected exchange of his sacred cross tattoo to Dewey's hand, taught Park to research further into her experience. With that, Guwan left to join in to his obligations, including the assortment of a spirit. Park, actually confused by Guwan's deficiency of abilities, addressed how he would satisfy his errand without them. Guwan, showing a smidgen of self-importance, guaranteed him of his capability, stressing his broad experience as a fiend crossing north of 2 centuries. Similarly, as he says, he passes on to proceed to gather the spirit. In any case, the man whose spirit should have been gathered was a competitor and a fighter, who really whips Guwan later on, since he likewise has a ton of men with him, while Guwan was isolated. So Young takes out the fighter's contact and shows it to him, advising him that the 10-year time limit has finished. So he requests that the fighter's spirit leave his body and go to the hidden world. Rather than paying attention to him, the fighter really begins compromising Guwan. Young answers that these people won't ever learn. He lets them know all to come at him individually, yet rather than going individually, everybody begins progressing towards him out and out. Young additionally starts to gradually move in reverse, and he advises them to come individually, since every one of them were very much assembled fighters and competitors. Then, at that point, every one of them jumped at him and started to thrash him. He answers that this is no real way to show sportsmanship, so they ought to come each in turn. After he understands that they will meet up, more men show up from the manor in which he was wanting to go. So presently he is encircled by them. Jung then compromises them and says that he would rather not do this. However, he has no other decision. He places his hand in his jacket just to bring his hand out to flip them off. As he does this, he leaps through the window and terrains in a trash to pad his fall. At the point when he gets back up, he takes a gander at a similar window to track down the fighter there, and he hollers at the fighter that he will be back. And afterward the fighter will lament this, and afterward he flips him off once more. So the fighter does likewise and flips him off back again as well. Also, Jung then, at that point, leaves and leaves. What's more, on this note, the scene closes. The following scene gets going by showing us how Woody is released from the clinic. She is once again at her home, and she is telling Ms. Shin about how Guwan was likewise alone with her in the eatery. Afterward, when she was being pursued by an executioner, she was again drawn closer by Guwan. She keeps on clarifying for Ms. Shin how she accepts that this can't be all a fortuitous event, and that it should be an arrangement of some kind. Ms. Shin then asks her what she thinks the arrangement is, and what she needs from her. She answers that he needs to make some kind of manage her, since he said that he needs to make an arrangement with her, and that he will possibly save her from the executioner assuming she makes an arrangement. The following scene starts by showing the executioner who takes the veil off his face, And this is a similar executioner who kills Mr. Tae-jun, the person who needed to give Dewey some data. We are shown that the room is faintly lit. There are various covers on the table, and there is a board on a wall. On that board, there are photos of a great deal of young ladies. However, this executioner's essential spotlight is on Dewey. There is no information about how he knows Lady Ju or why he needs to kill Dewey. Right now, somebody thumps on the entryway, so they go to open it. At the point when he opens the entryway, he figures out that it is the mortgage holder. It just so happens a couple of individuals needed to work on acting, so they moved into the house on a lease premise. Perhaps this executioner has killed those entertainers, practically speaking. Also, perhaps he has taken the character of one of those entertainers and is utilizing that personality to live there. The proprietor needed to meet the supervisor of the entertainer since he had not met him for a couple of months. In the first place, the supervisors used to proceed to meet the mortgage holders to proceed to pay the lease and money while they were there. Yet, throughout the course of recent months, somebody has been paying the lease by moving the cash on the web, so the property holder needed to meet the supervisors. While the executioner's brain is dashing with contemplations, the property holder recognizes the guilty conscience and inquires as to whether it was blood as affirmation. The executioner was fast with his reaction and said that it was phony blood. He added that they required a shot with some blood for their next scene in the shooting, so they needed to go for the best quality one. Nonetheless, since it additionally smelled extremely unpleasant, the property holder said that it looked so genuine that assuming somebody saw it, they would truly feel that he had truly killed somebody, yet presently the executioner began lashing out. The property holder said that assuming the chief comes, advise him to meet the proprietor something like once. The executioner would have rather not taken additional risks, particularly in light of the fact that the mortgage holder had seen his face. So he welcomed him in under the guise of a break in the roof, and furthermore killed him. Dewey goes to visit Lady Ju, and keeping in mind that she is with her, she recollects what the executioner says regarding Lady Ju being the purpose for her passing. Unintentionally, Lady Ju is likewise released from the medical clinic on precisely the same day. Lady Ju likewise learns about the 10% misfortune in the organization's portions. So she asks Dewey, assuming she realizes who is behind this tremendous misfortune. Dewey decides to lie, and on second thought of telling her, then Dewey assists Lady Ju with passing on the medical clinic and returns her to her home. At the point when they arrive at Lady Ju's home, they begin to water the plants in the nursery. She abruptly recalls what the executioner shared with her about Lady Ju being an ideal justification for her demise. So she inquires as to whether Lady Ju has at any point kept something from her. Lady Ju says no, obviously not, to which she asks, once more assuming Lady Ju is certain that she has kept nothing from her. Lady Ju's looks change and go full serious and intense. Furthermore, she says that she is certain she has kept nothing from her. Also, furthermore, Lady Ju says that she tells Dewey about everything. Dewey says that she accepts Lady Ju since she is the main individual Dewey can trust, even with her eyes shut. Ju Sayo then, at that point, comes over and welcomes everybody, and afterward hands Lady Ju a document that shows her the report of the stud deals in his organization. Lady Ju takes a gander at the reports and hands them right back to him. He then, at that point, says that she has never commended him. What's more, she ought to praise him. At some point, she answers that this is your work. For what reason would it be advisable for me to praise you on your work? So regardless, you ought to function admirably at it. They all begin snickering at this answer by Lady Ju. When all the chuckling is finished, Dewey gets up and says that she will take off and that she will go to the workplace. Ju Sayo says that he will likewise go to the workplace with her. Lady Ju takes a gander at both of them standing together and expresses that since the two of them are very obsessive workers, they will make an excellent and impressive couple. And afterward, she suggests that the two of them get hitched to one another, and afterward they can cast a ballot and care for the business together. Dewey asks her not to begin this marriage subject again, please? Lady Ju then expressed that everything looks great among them getting hitched since they are not related by blood. Ju Sayo likewise answers by saying that what Lady Ju said resembles a joke. Dewey tells him that Madame Ju is dying to get Dewey married, so he should not take her seriously. The both of them leave for the office. Even though Ju Sayo did bring his own car, he says to her that he did not bring his own car. So he says to her that he can drop her off at the office in her own car. So this gives us a hint that maybe Ju Sayo really might like Dewey, and maybe he does really have feelings for her. Ju Sayo then asks another question asking who actually was that Guwan guy. Dewey responds by saying that it's no one special. It's just the guy with whom she went on a blind date. Ju Sayo was so shocked by this that he slammed his foot on the brake pedal, causing the entire car to jerk and then stop in the middle of the road. Dewey was perfectly fine, but because of the jerk, Miss Shin hit her face on the dashboard and Siak Mine started bleeding. So as a result of this little incident, she sent him to the back seats and continued the journey by driving herself. The both of them ask her from the back seat if she's okay, and she responds by saying that she will be okay as long as she is the one driving. Once they were in the back seat, she asked him why he suddenly slammed his foot on the brake pedal the moment he heard that she went on the blind date. He got extremely nervous, but he thought quickly and responded by saying that he had never heard her mention anything about dates, marriages, or relationships. He also adds that she is so young right now and very young for marriage. She then replied by saying he already knew the reason. He gets shocked, his mouth opens wide, and he excitedly asks her if she is getting married. She replies with a straightforward no and says that Madame Jew forced her to go on that blind date. So she had no other option but to go on that date. She also said that she has no plans to get into any relationships or marriages in the near future. He replies that in that case, he will also not get married early. She notices his words and asks him what he meant when he said them in that case. He gets extremely nervous yet again. Dewey's eyes then go on his tie, which is extremely jumbled up and messed up. She tries to fix it for him, but she cannot fix it because of how much the both of them are laughing and playing around. The scene ends on this note. The other scene begins on the other side of town, and it starts off by showing us that John Guwan is browsing through the Demon Manual book to find out everything about what happens when the Holy Cross mark is transferred and how he can get it back. Despite going back and forth through the manual multiple times, he cannot find anything related to this topic in the manual. So he calls Butler Park and asks him to tell him everything he has learned about Dewey. The butler responds by telling him that she is a blood type of AB+, and that she is the CEO of the company, Miri Group. She is known as the princess of the Miri Group in the industry. However, in her office, she is known as the devil, since she is known for going to any extent and any level of strictness and rudeness when it comes to work. She wants every single thing to be absolutely flawless and perfect. So all of her employees would need to expect all kinds of work before they got their tasks. She also does not belong to Madame Jew's family. Her father was an electrical engineer and her mother ran a beauty salon, but the both of them got into an accident 17 years ago, and that resulted in the both of them losing their lives. Dewey was then adopted by Madame Jew of the Miri Group because her father and Madame Jew had worked together to form the Miri Group's first ever company, Miri Electronics. Ever since she was a young girl, she was extremely smart and hardworking. She would always rank at the top of her classes in school and at the top of all of her classes in college and university. While she was in university, she created his first company, which is now the biggest company of the Miri Group, Miri F&B, or Food and Beverage. She then reaches her office, and the moment she entered the office, everyone stopped slacking off and immediately got back to their work. She also gets to work right away. Because of that article posted by Swan, the company's reputation and stock suffered a huge loss. So in order to get all of that reputation and stock prices back, she browses through everything she can do. She is in a meeting when Ms. Shin approaches her and whispers in her ear the details about Swan and her whereabouts. She immediately leaves the meeting and tells everyone to keep working and not stop. Ms. Shin says that she wants to come with her, but she says no and says that she must do her own work herself. On the other side of town, the butler also tells Jong that Dewey is currently single because none of her past relationships worked out properly. Butler Park says that this is everything he could find out. Jong says that he will now go and do what he does best. When his butler asks him what he's going to do, he says that he is going to go and set a trap for a human since that is what he does best. We are now shown Swan in a shop, trying on new dresses in front of the mirror. She's accompanied by her manager. She asked the manager, if Dewey's company had faced a 10% loss in stocks, how much money have they lost? The manager answers and tells her the amount, which was 260 billion won. Swan is really happy after she hears this, and she says that it is only fair if they send her a bouquet of flowers to support her in these tough times. And then she starts laughing. Dewey comes up behind her and says that there is no need for all of that. Swan and the manager are left in complete shock. They're both speechless for a few minutes before Swan finally musters up the courage to speak. She asks Dewey what she is doing at the shop, especially when her company is facing such a huge loss. Dewey starts to smile and responds by saying that stocks always go up and down, but now they will only go up. The manager is asked to leave the room, and Dewey and Swan take a seat. Swan asks if Dewey will be blackmailing her, to which she responds by saying no. She just says that since you leak my personal information, you better be careful about who can leak your personal information too. Dewey shows her some pictures she captured of Swan cheating on her husband by having an affair with another man. At this moment, she received a call from Zhang who says that he has gotten extremely sick after the accident and that he wants to meet her. She asks him how that is possible since he was perfectly fine at the hospital. He is quick at his feet, so he responds by saying that this just started a few days ago, so he started getting sick a few days after the incident. So Dewey invites him somewhere nearby to meet. Dewey then turns back toward Swan and says that all the tampering she did to the article should be fixed within one singular day, and by tomorrow, Dewey should be receiving good news about her company. Otherwise, these photos will go viral, and when they reach Madame Jew, she takes a pause, looks at Swan, and says that she knows what will happen next. Swan then gets up and starts to threaten Dewey by saying that if her mother Madame Jew finds out about this, then something bad will happen to her. Dewey replies instantly, asking Swan how she can even dare to give her threats. Dewey also adds on that Swan should remember that Dewey never hides anything from Madame Jew, so Swan should think twice before she does anything. She also tells Swan not to fight with her, and if she really does feel like fighting with someone, she should fight with her brother. She then takes her leave after saying this, leaving Swan speechless. In another place, Madame Jew kneels before the church father, her voice trembling with guilt as she confesses her sins. She knows she deserves punishment in the afterlife, but her greatest fear is not receiving forgiveness, specifically from Dewey. A small flashback transports us 17 years back when Dewey's parents tragically died. Madame Jew, frozen in shock, had watched helplessly as their car burst into flames before her eyes. The weight of guilt has burdened Madame Jew for years, consuming her with remorse and driving her to seek redemption and forgiveness, especially from Dewey. Butler Park is deeply pondering whether his chief, Guwan, can successfully play out his work, feeling progressively stressed for his security. Regardless of this worry, he has full trust in Guwan's capacity to handily deceive individuals, as Park has succumbed to him once, yet 2 times previously. We are taken to a clear flashback of Park's previous existence, where he was near the precarious edge of self-destruction because of the mind-boggling sadness coming from his faltering business. Notwithstanding, Guwan entered his life like an unexpected beam of light, and Park marked an apparently extraordinary agreement with him to turn into the proprietor of the renowned 2000 Cafe around then, immovably accepting it would take care of all his apparently vast issues. By capitulating to the appeal of veracity, Park chooses to sign the agreement. In a natural, practically ceremonial restricting function, Guwan pricks Park's shutterfinger with a needle. This basic yet representative demonstration triggers distinctive recollections of Park's past life, when he made a comparable arrangement with Guwan. In that life, Park used to catch and sell fish, turning out to be very well off all the while. Notwithstanding, following a lot of time enjoying fish, he unfortunately met his end while eating one, and his spirit was tortured and held by the wrathful spirits of the fish he had consumed. Recollecting this frightful memory, Park detonates into an irate fury and assaults Guwan, driven by a mind-boggling feeling of treachery, yet entirely it's past the point of no return. Yet again, he has proactively marked the agreement, and like his past lives, Park is bound to Guwan, breaking out of his viewpoints while completely partaking in his scrumptious food. Steward Park marvels to himself how, if the supervisor actually had his unprecedented abilities, he might have effectively and easily caught anybody who considered resisting him. Notwithstanding, now that the manager doesn't appear to have those considerable abilities any longer, an inquiry poses a potential threat in head servant Park's psyche. Can Guwan presently get Dewey and his cunningly conceived net? Unbeknownst to him, fellow youthful with her sharp detects, had heard this peaceful murmuring and loaded up with interest. She gradually moved toward head servant Park. She smoothly and honestly asks him how the supervisor lost his once dreaded powers. Steward Park, surprised by her abrupt request, is practically going to exclaim reality with regards to how Dewey currently uses Guwan's powers. In any case, after seeing person youthful's entering look, he chooses to stay quiet for the occasion. Regardless of his endeavor to keep reality stowed away, fellow youthful, having spent a lifetime noticing everything he might do, knows how to separate data from him capably. With an unpretentious yet threatening presentation of her blade, she successfully scares him, convincing Steward Park to at last uncover reality with regards to how Guwan has been deprived of his once strong powers. Dewey showed up at the assigned gathering place where she had requested that Guwan meet her, her heart weighty with expectation and vulnerability. Questions sneaked in as she reviewed his reasons for being wiped out on the telephone, driving her to address why he was by all accounts keeping away from her. Was there a secret explanation for his non-attendance? Did he never again need to see her? These contemplations twirled to her, creating a shaded area over her assumptions. Completely persuaded that he wouldn't come, she chose to call him. In any case, similarly as she settled on the decision, her look lifted and her breath trapped in her throat. There on the opposite side of the wellspring was Guwan, strolling towards her with a certain step. At that time appeared to stop as she wound up enthralled by his presence. Regardless of the disarray and unanswered inquiries, one thing was clear. She was unable to prevent the certain appeal from getting Guwan's attractive face. After seeing Guwan's methodology, Dewey's look stayed fixed on him, her heart shuddering at his proximity. She immediately finished the call and addressed him, her voice bound with interest and a smidgen of perkiness, asking why he had concocted the rationalization of being sick when his face seemed, by all accounts, to be gleaming with well-being and joy. Guwan, shocked by her unequivocal quality, began to feel anxious, his cheeks flushing somewhat, inquiring as to whether she truly thought his face was shining. Excusing the subject, Dewey referenced the past misconception, her tone touched with lament for burning through his time and, in any event, getting him food. She offered him cash as pay, her eyes reflecting truthfulness. Yet Guwan denied as he expressed that he didn't require it and that he had as much abundance as she did. Dewey asked Guwan what he needs rather than cash. Then, at that point, search for a method for settling the score? He answered that since the occurrence including her, he had been encountering an odd change in his body, feeling unfit to focus on anything. His contemplations continually floating to her, dissimilar to anything he had at any point felt. Dewey recommended he see a therapist. Her anxiety was apparent, yet all the same Guwan denied. His eyes locked on hers, demanding that no one but she could fix him. He grasped her hand and moved her nearer, his touch sending a shudder down her spine, guaranteeing she was liable for his condition and that he had been feeling odd since he met her. Guwan then looked profoundly at Dewey, flabbergasting her and shocked as she wound up, likewise gazing once again into his. The team end up where Guwan is driving Dewey someplace with him in the vehicle, attempting to guarantee space between them. She makes sense of that she is only helping him and hanging out, guaranteeing he doesn't confuse it as a date or something different. In spite of her explanation, Guwan endeavors to hold her hand, proposing a heartfelt signal. Dewey, seeing his activities as excessively hurried, yet enticed to yield, offers her left hand. Yet, Guwan demands her right, their hands interweave, and Guwan, presently holding her hand, speeds up the vehicle. Befuddled by his unexpected speed, Dewey questions his activities, to which Guwan nonchalantly answers that they are simply going on a short drive. Nonetheless, Guwan's central goal becomes visible as the tattoo on Dewey's hand includes a sparkling heavenly cross, showing Guwan's powers have been re-established. He changes the traffic light from red to green and paces through traffic to gather the fighter's spirit before 12 p.m. Or, in all likelihood, it would be Guwan getting the discipline. In the meantime, the fighter, who had consented to sell his spirit, goes away from the exercise center with his arrangement look in his grasp. He in the long run disposes of it and starts talking with his companions about going out. Out of nowhere, Guwan shows up in his vehicle and focuses a stopgap firearm from his fingers towards the fighter, who kicks the bucket in practically no time as Guwan approached his powers. Thus his agreement consumes. The clock demonstrating his help disappears from Guwan's office. Guwan sped up the vehicle again, inciting Dewey to scrutinize his activities. He nonchalantly excused her interests, expressing that he was essentially playing a trick with his companions. Dewey then, at that point, saw the course and got some information about their objective, to which Guwan mysteriously answered that they had one last undertaking. He drove her to a region close to the waterway, where couples were participated in heartfelt exercises, feeling overpowered. Dewey believes that things are moving excessively quick, and to add to it, Guwan proposes they accomplish something there. Apprehensively, Dewey communicates her anxiety about their new colleague and the impropriety of their activities in a public spot. In spite of her firm no, Dewey's anxiety at the chance of something heartfelt happening is apparent. Guwan gets out of the vehicle and approaches her window, recommending they head outside. Dewey answers by helping him to remember the legitimate results they could confront. Guwan listens mindfully, apparently entertained by Dewey's tangled sentiments. Guwan asks why taking a walk around the stream could prompt lawbreaker allegations, which shocks and humiliates Dewey, who figured there would be more. As they stroll to the calmer and more detached piece of the way close to the stream, they stop. Dewey utilizes this snapshot of quietness to make it clear to Guwan that she was not making heartfelt situations in that frame of mind. All things considered, stopping him from attempting to make any, as by and large this was viewed as a heartfelt spot. In any case, Guwan is centered around his own plan and abruptly snatches Dewey's hands. He tenderly inquires as to whether she can pause just a tad. Dewey is shocked, considering what Guwan is thinking as he inches increasingly close to her, briefly. Dewey accepts that he will kiss her as his hand comes up to cup her neck. However, her misconception is brief, as out of nowhere a wicked grin runs over Guwan's face and pulls them both into the waterway, submerged. Dewey battles to pause her breathing. However, Guwan is adhered on attempting to get the tattoo to move back to his hand. Dewey begins shouting at him, requesting to understand how he needed to treat her, as she was almost suffocating. Overreacted, she keeps shouting, addressing why he needed to kill her, as she nearly suffocated 2 times as a result of him. She communicates her apprehension about somebody attempting to hurt her, and mourns the wreck he has caused in her life. Guwan advises her to quiet down and concentration. However, she demands her entitlement to be vexed, overflowed by feelings. Guwan tells her that he expected to actually look at something and accept she would have denied, assuming he had told her in advance. This maddens her, leaving her inclination profoundly double-crossed by his absence of concern. She tosses cash at him, pronouncing their record settled and leaving in outrage. In the interim, Guwan returns to his vehicle and is as yet distracted, mulling over how he can recover his sacred cross on the off chance that it doesn't return even after he enters the water. All of a sudden, Stewart Park shows up, and Guwan, infuriated, faces him about how he had the option to track down him. Stewart Park figures out how to quiet Guwan down, communicating shock that as opposed to beguiling Dewey like he figured he would, Guwan wound up suffocating her. Guwan questions Stewart Park's attendance right now. Yet Stewart Park makes sense of that Guwan was the person who had educated him to watch out for Dewey, and that is precisely the exact thing he had been doing. With nothing to do, they leave together to find Dewey, as the need might arise to keep in touch with her to utilize his powers. Without Dewey, endurance would be unquestionably trying for him, and he understands that at this point. Then again, Dewey was very vexed and was getting back. In one more corner of the city, the executioner who had killed Tae-jun looks at his telephone that he had kept subsequent to killing Tae-jun. He had gone through it. However, unusually, there was a photograph of Dewey as a youngster on his telephone, which the executioner then, at that point, put in a storage for care. Minutes after the fact, one more secret man recovers the photograph from the storage and takes it to a figure who may be his chief. Despite the fact that his face isn't shown at this point, his supervisor checks the telephone, which just holds back one final call, and that also was made to Dewey by Tae-jun. The shot spotlights on the hands of this man, demonstrating that he had requested the executioner to kill Dewey. On the opposite end, Guiyang had gathered all the data on Dewey that she would be able. Making irate strides, she kept the data to the side and zeroed in on her sword moving. Nonetheless, looming destruction was guaranteed by her activities towards Dewey. Back towards the tradition of Lady Ju, a ghostly quietness has spread over all relatives. Lady Ju, under the faint light of her review, goes to God to give her the solidarity to come clean to Dewey. Her child Sukmin is seen bird taking shots around evening time, which is totally different from the honest veneer he puts on before the remainder of his family. And his child has a mental meltdown while looking into an emotional well-being office. The goals of this family are obscure, yet they don't indicate harmony by any means. Swan likewise gets a call from her distributor, who needs to change the article they expounded on Dewey, costing Swan more cash. She reviles her heart out at Dewey. Her condemnations are simply foundation commotion in a bustling parking area. However, her vows to hurt Dewey are gotten underway. Ultimately, the clincher is uncovered. Saikin sits in his office late around evening time, cautiously analyzing the tie that Dewey had made for him. His expectations are obscure, yet his affections for Dewey are becoming more clear and more clear. Dewey is as of now disturbed as she strolls down the road to clear her head. Glancing around, her eyes coincidentally find an ad screen displaying the most recent news section. That is the point at which she sees the fresh insight about Mr. Tae-jun's demise, which is accounted for as him ending it all. Her eyes are stuck to the screen as she understands that just yesterday she had conversed with Mr. Tae-jun on the telephone. He planned to give her some data, and it sounded pressing. Her pulse races as the sensation of approaching destruction expansions in her. Step by step, in her diverted state, Dewey doesn't see a bicycle speeding directly past her. The bicycle rider was determined to toss corrosive on Dewey. He nearly succeeded as well. However, Guwan interceded without a second to spare. He hurls himself before Dewey, enduring the shot himself as the corrosive is tossed all around his back. It pauses for a minute for Dewey to recuperate from the reeling shock of what coincidentally outed of her days. She actually looks at Guwan for wounds, yet Guwan is generally out in front of her. He seizes her wrist, initiating the powers of the Blessed Cross. In a split second, the power flows through his body and his injuries are recuperated. Faking it, he basically tells Dewey to deal with herself, as she has something important to him. However, Dewey is as yet unfit to process this enchanted component that Guwan has brought into her life. Looking for lucidity, she asks Guwan what he is. Guwan accepts that at this point he doesn't have anything to stow away from Dewey. Thus he lets her in on reality with regards to him being an evil presence. Exactly the same fiend that people dread. This doesn't assist with Dewey find her solutions. yet she finally accepts reality to continue on toward additional significant things. The two of them head together to the police headquarters, where they report the occurrence that simply occurred. The police do their exhaustive due ingenuity, and afterward affirm to Doohee that the assault endeavored on her was utilizing sulfuric corrosive. Had Guwan not safeguarded her, Doohee might have been truly harmed, as sulfuric corrosive is deadly for people. The police notice a rehashed example of assaults on Doohee and reach the resolution that somebody is deliberately focusing on her. They attempt to settle the case rapidly by asking Doohee for any prompts who could have done this. Yet, Doohee decides to be working out in her reaction. She offers no individual of doubt to the police, and on second thought passes on them to accomplish practically everything all alone. Meanwhile, Guwan had been hanging tight outside for Doohee. His bothering for people and their sensitive nature builds the more he pauses. Running over a wide range of unfortunate lawbreakers, his consideration is caught by a setup of suspects the police adjust along the edge of the sitting area. The object of interest was a lady who was all the way out of her brains. The police distinguish her as No Sue. However, no additional data is given about her. No Sue approaches Guwan herself, who is terrified to see her so near him as he didn't detect her drawing closer. She notices his admonition that his life is under choppiness at this point, and is being held by a string while death could move toward him rapidly. Guwan doesn't have to hear a greater amount of this insane lady and disappears, without a moment to spare, as Doohee emerged from the cross-examination room. The two of them disappear. Guwan chooses to drive Doohee back home, yet tenaciously begins chastening Doohee for not having the option to protect herself. He cautions her about what could have occurred on the off chance that he hadn't shown up on time, his principal concern being that his important tattoo would have been annihilated. Doohee, nonetheless, is as yet stuck handling the way that Guwan is a devil. She asks more from him, and he just makes sense of his tendency of making manages people. At the point when she asks what sort of arrangement, Guwan deceives her by telling her that he satisfies human dreams. They squabble this way, and that as Doohee attempts to grasp the degree of his powers and their source, with Guwan becoming offended and disturbed at her doubting. Nonetheless, Doohee understands that to satisfy his obligations, he would require the powers of the sacred cross, and the main way for him to get to his power is be in nearness to Doohee. Maybe a bulb goes off in her mind right now, and she proposes that Guwan become her guardian. It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement for the two of them, as Doohee would be protected from her assailant while Guwan would get to his powers when he wishes. In any case, Guwan will not turn into her guardian, saying he wouldn't safeguard a useless individual. Doohee advises him to comprehend that he is safeguarding his tattoo. However, Guwan actually denies. While the thought was great, Guwan thought no motivating force was sufficient to inspire him to safeguard a human. Doohee attempts to rebuke him with the possibility that assuming she passes on, he will not get his tattoo, so he ought to contemplate his advantages as well. This quickly grabs Guwan's eye, and he sees her tattoo, caught in thought, yet hesitant to turn into a guardian for her. He gets restless at his absence of acknowledgement and questions on the off chance that he can think of something better. In any case, Guwan stays obstinate. Despite the fact that he had no better thought, he could never remember to turn into her protector. As they arrive at the loft, Guwan begins to direct her out of the vehicle and to the structure lift. Doohee is interested about his activities, as it appears as though he is attempting to safeguard her. She utilizes this potential chance to buy, and by raise, turning into her protector. However, Guwan rushes to close it down. His main point right presently was to gain admittance to the structure surveillance camera film in order to get the assailant. As they enter the lifts, the two of them miss the aggressor who was prowling near. He was concealing in order to get Doohee alone once more and completing his assault. In any case, Guwan was by Doohee's side, and that disturbed the aggressor's arrangement. He left, fuming at one more botched and open door and a fantastic showcase of his psychopathic nature. Back at his home, Guwan whines to Stewart Park about the looming worry for his Heavenly Cross tattoo. He madly over-contemplates the condition of his tattoo on the off chance that something ends up doing his most terrible situation being assuming that the tattoo is gone and Guwan is passed on to consume in the fire. Stewart Park notices his interests and proposes that he consented to become Doohee's guardian. Yet again, assuming he is so worried about the security of his tattoo. Notwithstanding, Guwan allows his inner self to defeat him. He haughtily snickers at the prospect of him, a strong, evil spirit, being a protector to a humble human. It was against his inclination. Nonetheless, Head Servant Park gives close consideration to this, reminding Guwan that evil spirits initially coincided with people, and that it was their only obligation to be the defenders and watchmen of people. Turning into a protector to Doohee wouldn't be as against nature for devils as Guwan was suspecting. Yet Guwan actually declined any thinking. He needed to be allowed to partake in his life as an evil presence, and not take on additional obligations than he previously played in his part as a devil. Attempting to get Guwan to break under tension, Stewart Park examined him concerning what might occur if Doohy enlightened different people regarding Guwan being an evil presence. Guwan rushed to dismiss it before he understood that something almost identical had happened to him previously, and he needed to delete the recollections of every one of the individuals who found out. This could be alarming for him, as now he doesn't have the ability to openly eliminate individuals' recollections as he wishes. The prospect of his own actual weakness brought Guwan shuddering hot outrage. Thus he kept his wicked book to the side in acknowledgement that it was ending up of no utilization for his concerns. There's an obscure feeling of looming inconvenience, particularly when Doohy's name comes up. She nonchalantly communicates something specific, inquiring as to whether the choice to turn into her guardian has been made. With no quick answer from Guwan, Doohy energetically depends on dangers, nonchalantly recommending that she'll utilize laser treatment to cause his tattoo to vanish on the off chance that he disagrees. Guwan feeling somewhat incited, stressed if she could really proceed with what she was talking about, and, assuming she did, what might happen to his tattoo. Notwithstanding this, he stays firm in his choice and won't surrender to her requests, as Doohy nonchalantly looks at his tattoo on her hand. She contemplates whether there really are powers inside it, and what might befall the destiny of this tattoo. No matter what Guwan's refusal to safeguard her, she can recognize that he has saved her 2 times as of now. At the point when she felt like there was no chance to get out, Guwan appeared, and that caused her to feel more secure for reasons unknown. Then, at that point, Doohy's heart sank as she found out about Tijun's self-destruction on the news portion playing on her television behind the scenes. The memory of their last discussion, just yesterday, overflowed her psyche. Tijun had called her with some exceptional news connected with the organization, a discussion presently perpetually carved in her memory. With overwhelming sadness, she recollected that she needed to call Lady Ju to share the staggering news. She was unable to shake the inclination that Tijun's passing was some way or another associated with that last call. Lady Ju, while attempting to stay made available for any emergencies, couldn't conceal her own anxiety. She asked Doohy to zero in on the organization and not harp on what uncertainties, guaranteeing her that everything would be dealt with inside their gathering. Subsequent to hanging up with Doohy, Lady Ju's veneer disintegrated. She realized she needed to act. Right away, she reached her secretary, Mr. Yin, and mentioned the monetary reports for the beyond 10 years. As she looked into them, her hands shuddered. The disparities she found were not simply numbers. They were a double-crossing of trust. She understood that her carelessness in managing these issues for a really long time had prompted this second. The following morning, Guwan makes his espresso, appearing to be very satisfied. Stewart Park is stunned to see such a change in his state of mind from the previous evening. At the point when he asks what welcomed this on, Guwan says he's attempting to remain positive, noticing that his tattoo hasn't vanished, that it's as yet protected, albeit in the possession of Doohy. Nonetheless, Guwan acknowledges he will not have the option to effectively recover his tattoo. However, is before long occupied by the smell of something consuming. In a little while, the weak smell of something consuming tenderly drifts past Guwan's nose. It is then in that transient second that the two of them notice with awe that one of Guwan's fingers is gradually starting to consume. This sight shocks them both profoundly. Stewart Park, his face a veil of concern, attempts to victory the fire. He puzzles over whether the ideal opportunity for Guwan to consume a rush of frenzy in Guwan, for he understands he doesn't have a clue about the response. By and by, he is centered around his assurance to act. Together, they endeavor to douse the fire by blowing on it. However, the fire continues to consume his finger briefly. It appears like nothing is working out. Then, Gaiyong, in a condition of wild frenzy, hurries into the kitchen. Frightened by the scene before her, she intuitively gets a close-by container of water and pours it over Guwan's hands, effectively smothering the fire. As the pressure facilitates, Guwan is struck by the acknowledgement that he should perform his responsibility and gather the spirit of a human rapidly, or his destiny will be fixed. What's more stressing to him is that he is unsure of the specific idea of the discipline he faces. With a need to get moving, he goes after the telephone and calls Doohy, telling her that he is prepared to turn into her guardian. Guwan advises Doohy that he is coming to meet her immediately, albeit very astounded by his unexpected arrangement. Doohy rapidly prepares to see him and heads down the stairs to her structure's parking garage where she meets him. In the meantime, Guwan fills an ice pail with a ton of ice, so in the event that his limitless fire discipline begins again on his finger, he can plunge his hand in ice and quench it. At last gathering Doohy, Guwan quickly advises her again that he is prepared to turn into her guardian. He concurs as this is what she needed, yet questions why he abruptly adjusted his perspective. She considers what occurred for him to concur after he was so determined about rejecting her last evening. Guwan comes up with a faltering rationalization that he considered for quite a while. In the event that people can safeguard little bugs and bugs, then at that point, the least he can do is safeguard one human, yet legitimately Dohi doesn't trust him. She says that something most certainly appears to be not entirely okay in his arrangement. Unexpectedly, Guwan's finger begins consuming once more, so he rapidly conceals it despite his good faith and plunges it in the ice container. He hears the fire being extinguished in the can and gets inquisitive. She attempts to see behind him. However, Guwan doesn't believe she should figure out his shortcoming. He discards the ice pail rapidly and holds Dohi by her arms, moving her consideration by professing to make her concentrate, yet telling her that our destiny is something very similar, and the answers for the issues we have are additionally something very similar. Dohi concurs, happy with getting everything she could possibly want with this. She, notwithstanding, places the condition that Guwan should begin immediately. Hearing this, Guwan holds her hand once more, which returns his powers, and tells her that we need to head off to someplace since there is a vital work to do. Saying this, he ships them, and Dohi ends up at the highest point of the clock tower with Guwan. While not entirely settled to finish a mission, Dohi gets terrified and considers what she got herself hauled into.